We also discussed last week about a dry cleaners who has his goyish couriers, and he's Makabel Shabbos early, Kaminik Rive, Stanford Hill and Golders Green, V'chulu. Can his delivery boys continue doing deliveries, till the Lichtzinden? And the same thing would be for, let's say, if I have a car service. And I was talking to Ingeman about this question. He says, why do people take a car service 5 minutes before Shabbos, 10 minutes before Shabbos? It may be a certain legitimacy. Some of us think it's just Wildkeit. But let's say there's a young couple coming to the in-laws for Shabbos. They don't want to come a half an hour early because it's an imposition. And we all know how the tension the last minutes before Shabbos. And it may actually be wiser, in their perspective at least, to come closer to Shabbos than earlier. So this idea of coming by car closer to Shabbos, I'm not condoning it. But I'm saying I can see the merit in doing so. And therefore the question is, if I'm a Jewish car service and I've got and I'm coming Shabbos early, can my cars continue driving until Lichtzinden? So I mentioned this last week that I said it's okay. And then I had thoughts whether I was right or wrong. So I'm just going to look at this piece of Shulchan Aruch. It's on Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch in Simarei Samach Aleph. So let's take a look where Sit Gimel, the Chol Zeh Kashadayin Lo Kibal Olav Shabbos. He talks about the concessions during Bein Hashmoshes. Bein Hashmoshes, you're allowed to do various things like taking Meiser, etc. That's if you haven't been Makabel Shabbos. And here's very interesting. If you were Makabel Shabbos, it's stricter than Bein Hashmoshes. But if you were Makabel Shabbos, whether it was through Ma'ariv, or you answered Baruch Hu, or if you are in a town where the majority of town have answered Baruch Hu, even though you weren't even part of that group. And therefore, if the majority of town are Makabel Shabbos, so you're also bound by them. There's an exception if you are part of a separate minyan, whatever. Let's not go into that. So then he says, if you are Makabel Shabbos, then you can't do in other words, if you haven't taken Meiser and you have some food for Shabbos and it's Ben Hashmoshes, you can take Meiser Ben Hashmoshes. But if you're Makabel Shabbos, you can't take Meiser Ben Hashmoshes. Now, then this is what's crucial to us. Aval muter loimer lenochri lasus afilu melacha gemura. You have been Makabel Shabbos. You've davened Ma'ariv. You're allowed to go tell a guy to do a melacha gemura, even for dvar. It doesn't have to be dvar mitzvah, even dvar hashus. Imu harbe koydim halayla, if it's well before nacht. Because levada yesh mekoymes Yisrael she'loi kiblu adayin haShabbos. There are some places where Yidden are still doing melacha. It's inconceivable to say you mustn't ask a goy to do melacha when there are Yidden doing melacha. And so therefore that remains very clear. Even if you've done Makabel Shabbos b'tfilah, you still can ask a goy to do melacha for you, or for that matter, you could ask another Yid. And as we know, Lubavitch is living in Stanford Hill. Sometimes you're going to be asked by a neighbor who's already been Makabel Shabbos, can you come and switch on my oven or switch off my air conditioner, whatever it may be? And that's legitimate because that's before, because even if they've been Makabel Shabbos, they can still ask someone else to do a melacha for them. Because it's a dover chutz migufa. It's not doing themselves, they're doing it through someone else. So here we have several people ask, what's then the reason for the skipping of etc. Not the Chadaydi, skipping the first kapitelach on when Yom Tov coincides with Shabbos. So here we have a quote from a Sikh of the Rebbe. The Sidurim is, it's written in Sidurim that the first 5 Mizmorim correspond to the first 5 days of the week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The Mizmor Havu was Keneged Yom Vav. The Mizmor Havu Lashem Ne'elim corresponds to Friday. Okay. You can see in some Polish Sidurim how it says that each of those kapitelach are kind of corresponding to one day of the week. So we've got 6 chapters of Tehillim leading up before the Chadaydi, corresponding to 6 days of the week, and then afterwards, obviously, you'll have Mizmor Yom Shabbos, which is corresponding to Shabbos. That's another discussion. Now the Rebbe adds to this, V'yesh loima, shezeu atam. This is the reason why when Yom Tov coincide, or Chol HaMoed coincide with Shabbos, we don't say these 5 Mizmorim. Ki lo masim oz la'arev in yonim shel chayil. You're focusing on Yom Tov. even though it's not Yom Tov yet, because you haven't been Makabel, but you're in the Yom Tov mood. Now to start a Yom Tov thinking out the previous Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, yeah, you focus now on the Yom Tov day. What about the Friday capital? Ashenken, Amizmir Hovu. Whereas the chapter of Mizmir Ladov Hovnel Hashem Ne'elim, which corresponds to the Friday, well, Friday is already a bit more festive. It's already Hachonah Shabbos, and therefore it fits to say it. It's not. It's in other words, you're saying to think of the past the weekdays, when you're in a Yom Tov mode, that doesn't fit. Whereas to think of Friday when you're in a Yom Tov mode, that's okay. Therefore, you'd mention Hov correspond to Friday, but you wouldn't mention you wouldn't say the other chapters which correspond to the earlier days of the week. So that's the Rebbe's take on it in that Sikh and Tov Shem Aleph. Then we have what earlier Sforim. So we have here one reason. This is from the Sefer Oitzer Kol Minhagei Yeshurun, who says it's got to do with Simchas Yom Tov. The fact that davening is a bit shorter as to Simchas Yom Tov. Then we have, and which I think I mentioned last week, that there's the minhag of those who say Bameh Madlikin every Friday evening. But when Yom Tov coincides with Shabbos, they won't say Bameh Madlikin. And Alter Rebbe brings there the reason, K'dei L'maher b'Simchas Yom Tov. You davened Ma'ariv already, so the minhag the Olam is to say Bameh Madlikin after Ma'ariv. And so go home already instead of hanging around. It's Yom Tov, so to come home a bit earlier. Then there's another reason. What's the reason why we have why do we have the Brocha Me'en Sheva? On Friday night is the only Ma'ariv where we have a Chazoros Hashatz of sorts. Why is that? So there's a whole reason, because people will be out in the fields, and so there may be someone who's davening a bit slower, so you shouldn't have to walk home alone, so they drew out the davening a little bit longer. So when there's a Shabbos, which is a Chol HaMoed, so the Alter Rebbe says there, on Chol HaMoed, people are not so busy on Friday. Again, why do people come daven a bit longer? Perhaps because they come in a bit later, because they were busy. So they were delayed till they got into shul. But when it comes to Chol HaMoed, they're not so busy, because there's a lot of stuff you're not doing Chol HaMoed in any case. Therefore, there's less likelihood of them coming to shul late, and therefore there's not such a need to hang around a bit longer, and that's the reason for missing out Bameh Madlikin on a Friday evening, which is a Chol HaMoed. That doesn't necessarily help us for why we skip the 5 kapitelach. Well, as I said before, it's possibly because of Simchat Yom Tov. Okay, then we had. I want to say that I appreciate with the chat, and people are typing in sometimes stuff. Whilst I'm online, I'm finding it difficult to deal with the chats, simultaneously. But afterwards, I did look through the chat and was able to respond to some of the questions. Last week, we had a whole discussion of I told the story of Yehuda Kolasher with a bris. When someone asked him, can you do a pidyon aben without a bris? And so people took that as a surprise. But I said, obviously, it was a strategy in that time, but certainly la halacha, you would be able to, if necessary, you do a bris. You do a pidyon aben, even if a bris wasn't made. So then comes up this question: what happens when, for some reason, the baby cannot have a bris now because it's various medical conditions? What do you do about naming the baby? I remember my father, Allah Shalom, had a bris. He had occasionally there's something called hypospadium, which means that there's a certain growth in that area which needs surgery, and you can't cut off too much skin because the surgeon needs it to repair when he'll do the operation. Then once it was another bris, which is Brudi Stern, Allah Shalom, with the moil. So sometimes it can be you have to leave the bris for a few months, and it becomes a question: what do you do about giving a name? So what I have in front of you on the screen is from the Sefer Ziv Hashemis. This is written by Rabbi Shaya Zusha Wilhelm. So that's the name Ziv. The Rosh Hashanah is Shaya Zusha Wilhelm. And he's published a Sefer 7 times or more. So it's a popular Sefer. So the first chapter, in paragraph Hey, he writes, if the bris can't be done on time, there are different minhagim. Some will give the name, like you do Mishabech for a girl, you do Mishabech for the boy and give the name by Aliyah L'Torah. Some say that you should wait, and that you should give the name before the bris, because then it's not called the oral yet. And then others wait until the bris actually takes place, even if it's several weeks. Now, in the note below, which is not from Div Hashemus, I have this note. Why do we give the name at the bris? Why don't we just do a Mishaberach? What's the naming got to do with the bris? So we have that Avram was renamed. His new name Avraham was associated with the bris milah, and there are other reasons given. So we have the minhag of naming dafka by the bris, and so we have now, in the case it can't be done by the bris, or the bris is going to be delayed, and there becomes practical questions. The child needs to be, you need to make a birth certificate, etc., to register the baby, etc. So these are practical questions. So now he goes further in the second paragraph, in paragraph Vav. If there's a bechor and they need to make a pidyon haben, so some say you'll do the naming at the pidyon haben. Not everyone agrees with that, as you see in note 8. So that's another situation. Then we have here the third paragraph Zayin, which is really what we're discussing. But here the question is, you want to write a pidyon to a rebbe. You want to ask for a bracha. You want to daven for the child. When you daven for someone, you mention the name and the mother's name. So what do you do with this child? You want to daven. If the bris is delayed, obviously there's some condition you want to daven for. So he has here in footnote 9 a story with such a case that they with Rabbi Feinstein and someone else, Ozer of a Rebbe, who told them to give a name before the bris, and then he has a quote from Kfar Chabad that someone asked the Rebbe in such a situation, and the Rebbe said they should give a name to the child, and they should share it with him, but they should not publicize it until the bris. So where practical, sometimes I know of there's been cases that bris has had to be delayed even for a year or something. But if it's just for a few weeks, hopefully, so then I understand from this answer of the Rebbe, we would try to we'll give a name, keep it private, and only by being mefarsim the name at the bris. Okay, let's go on to the next point on our list. Someone asked me, it was a couple of weeks ago, he asked me, I don't know if this was a Maisa B'Poyel or it was more of a Lomdische question. If the bris is delayed because of jaundice, and we learned in Gemara Shabbos recently, the jaundice means, the yellowness means that the blood hasn't kind of been absorbed in the circulation or in the system. Now, we know that there's always people try to make the bris bismanoi. That's wonderful. But how is it correct to do shtick to make the bris bismanoi? That's another question. Here the question was even further. The deadline, so to speak, of Yom Hashmini, the 8th day has passed already. There is a way of putting the child in an incubator with some kind of light, which will serve to knock down the jaundice. Is there a point in doing so, because you've missed the day of the bris in any case? Let's rephrase the question. Is there an urgency to do a bris on time or as early as possible when the bris is not going to be on the 8th day in any case? Sometimes it can be because you want to have the Zayda to come from another country. And sometimes people ask this question, it's not going to be bisman in any case. Can we allow a delay of a couple more days just for some other considerations? So let's deal with that first. A bris is a mitzvah min haTorah. It's a very important mitzvah. To neglect the mitzvah as a chi of chorus, it's a very serious mitzvah to be done ASAP. And therefore, it should be done without delay wherever possible. On the other hand, I'm so pleased I communicated these questions in advance because I got a voice message from Rabbi Yossi Simon, who's an excellent moil, and his experience or his knowledge, which is picked up obviously as a moil, is sometimes these putting under this blue light or something can actually be detrimental medically, And therefore, be very careful before you go for this method, because it could have repercussions. I want to just throw in, and because I'm not a moil, and this should be asked by a doctor, your APA did, but perhaps I've mentioned before that my Shver Allah Shalom, Rabbi Sudak, was in Yechidus, and it was about, must have been about Toshin Lamed Gimel. And he was asking about certain birth control methods for a certain couple, and I guess in the community, who I don't know who it was. And the Rebbe responded to him. Actually, Levi was in the Yechidus, and Meshver, Levi Tzulangiyo. Meshver told his son that it could be he'll have to go out of the room. But the Rebbe kind of spoke about this while Levi was there. And the Rebbe said about using medication. And the Rebbe, I heard it from Meshver several times. Sever dam oboso kibsoroi, und wer weiß, was kann sein die Tetzuas von dem, a viele über 20 Jahre herum. Talking about certain medications which are used, that it becomes, it's not like the other methods, which are more, barriers, etc., which are more, they're not so intrusive. Whereas these drugs, these pills, they get into the, whatever the word is, into the system, to the software, and they are very intrusive. And the Rebbe says it becomes damabosa kipsore, and who knows what could be the consequences of this kind of thing, even 20 years later. So thank you, Rabbi Yossi, for sharing with us this concern that using some of these methods may have other repercussions, and use them, with care, or with medical advice only. Right. Now,